I sold my house to pay for my surgery, and for a while I let myself believe that was what courage looked like. I told the realtor not to make a fuss about the price, not because I did not know what the place was worth, but because a man with a failing heart learns very quickly that the market value of wood and shingles does not matter much when a doctor is standing in front of him with a folder full of test results and a voice that has already dealt. I've heard this kind of news too many times. The house had been small, almost embarrassingly plain from the street. 2 bedrooms, 1 narrow bathroom with a stubborn sink, a garage whose door groaned every winter, and a backyard where my first wife Linda had once planted tomatoes in crooked rows, because she said straight lines belonged to men who trusted rulers too much. I had lived there for 22 years, long enough for every floorboard to know my steps and every wall to hold some version of my life. Tyra's height had been penciled into the kitchen doorframe, little marks from age 7 to age 16, the last one uneven because she had rolled her eyes while I tried to measure her, and told me she was too old for that. I never painted over those marks. After Linda died, I used to stand in that kitchen at night and run my fingers over them like a blind man reading scripture. Later, after Susan came into my life, and then left it 3 years ago through the long, cruel corridor of cancer, that house became the last place on earth where I could still hear both women if I was quiet enough. Linda in the garden, Susan humming while folding towels, Tyra's small feet running down the hall from a nightmare, my own younger voice promising everybody would be all right, because fathers say things like that even when they have no proof. Then Mercy General called with numbers and diagrams and warnings. Blockages, bypass, risk, recovery, cost. I signed away the house because I wanted to live, and because I still believed there was a difference between losing a building and losing a home. I told myself home was not wood and siding. Home was family. Home was my daughter. Home was the guest room Tara had mentioned once, years earlier, when she said, "Dad, if anything ever happens, you know you can always stay with us." I held on to that sentence, the way men in hospitals hold on to railings when they are asked to walk before they feel ready. The morning I was discharged, the hospital felt too bright. Fluorescent light has a way of making weakness look public. It takes every bruise, every sunken cheek, every tremor in the hand, and pins it under glass. I had been awake since 5, though the nurse told me there was no reason to be. I watched the clock above the door tick toward 9. My discharge time, and tried not to look at the clear plastic bag on the chair beside my bed. The bag contained everything I had brought with me: a pair of worn slacks, 2 shirts, my cracked reading glasses, the wallet with Linda's photograph and Susan's folded obituary tucked behind my Medicare card, a comb, a paperback I had not been able to read because pain makes the mind too narrow for fiction. 63 years of life, and my current inventory fit inside a hospital bag that rustled whenever the air conditioning clicked on. My chest ached with each breath. The surgeon said the procedure had gone well, and I believed him because I know what professional confidence sounds like. But the body does not immediately trust success. It remembers being opened. It remembers being handled. It remembers the violence done for the sake of repair. Every time I shifted, the incision pulled like a warning. The nurse came in to review medications and instructions, and I tried to nod at the right times, though the words blurred into lists of what I must not do. Do not lift, do not drive, do not climb too many stairs, do not sleep flat, do not ignore swelling, fever, dizziness, shortness of breath, mood changes, worsening pain, drainage, irregular heartbeat, sudden weakness. Do not be alone. She did not say that last part in those exact words, but it was there in the tone, in the printed packet, in the look she gave me when she asked who would be staying with me during recovery. And I said my daughter. Tara arrived at exactly 9. I heard her before I saw her, heels clicking down the hallway in a rhythm too brisk for a hospital wing, as if delay itself offended her. When she appeared in the doorway, she looked perfect in the way she always looked perfect when she wanted the world to know she had survived inconvenience without losing polish. Blonde hair smooth at the shoulders, cream blazer, gold watch, purse structured and expensive enough to sit upright on its own. She smiled, but something about it stayed on the surface. It did not reach her eyes. Her eyes moved from my face to the plastic bag to the discharge papers on the tray table, and for 1 second I saw impatience pass through her before she corrected it into concern. "Hi, Dad," she said, ready to get out of here. I smiled because I had been waiting for her the way a child waits to be picked up from school. "More than ready," I said. "This place makes me nervous." She made a soft sound that might have been sympathy and began gathering my things with efficient little motions, folding the hospital packet, placing my wallet in the bag, asking if the nurse had gone over everything. She did not touch my shoulder. She did not ask if the car ride would hurt. She did not ask if I was scared. I told myself she was tense because hospitals frightened her. Linda's sudden death had been in a hospital. Susan's final weeks had been in another. Tara had every reason to keep herself tightly controlled in places like this. That was the first excuse I gave her that morning. There would be others. The ride to Meadowbrook Estates was mostly silent. Tara drove with both hands on the wheel even though the road was clear. Her jaw set in a way I recognized from her teenage years. When she was about to tell me she had made a decision and needed me to accept, I watched the city give way to newer streets, newer houses, cleaner lawn. My old neighborhood had been practical, porches with chipped paint, trucks in driveways, people who waved because they had nothing to prove. Tara's neighborhood looked curated, beige colonials and black shutters, tidy mailboxes, seasonal wreaths, yards cut by professionals. Not because the owners loved grass, but because they feared judgment. I had helped her and Kevin with the down payment on that house. Not all of it, but enough that the closing would not have happened without me. I did not remind her. I never reminded Tara of things like that. Reminders make love look like accounting. And I had spent her whole life trying not to make her feel indebted. "Kevin is working from home today," she said as we turned onto her street. The sentence was ordinary. The tone was not. It landed between us like a small warning. I looked at her profile, the tightness at the corner of her mouth, the way her thumb pressed against the steering wheel. Kevin Walsh, my son-in-law of 13 years, had never liked me, though he was too polished to make dislike obvious in front of people who mattered. He was an insurance broker, successful enough to be pleased with himself, not successful enough to stop measuring every relationship by usefulness. At family gatherings, he shook my hand, asked how I was, and turned his attention away before I finished answering. He had a gift for making a person feel tolerated rather than welcome. I had told myself that was simply his personality. Another excuse. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked larger than I remembered. Maybe because I felt smaller. The front walk had been swept clean. 2 ceramic planters flanked the door, both full of flowers that looked professionally arranged. Tara took my bag from the back seat before I could reach for it, not gently but quickly, as if she wanted the scene completed before a neighbor looked out. Inside, the house felt cold despite the temperature. Everything was beige, cream gray glass and brushed metal. The living room had a sectional sofa that seemed designed more for display than use, a coffee table with heavy books no one read, and framed black and white prints of places Tara and Kevin had visited without inviting me. Tara called out, "Kevin, Dad's here." Her voice echoed a little in the high-ceilinged entryway. Kevin emerged from his office wearing khakis and a polo shirt, hair gelled though he had no reason to be seen by anyone but a webcam. His eyes went to the plastic hospital bag, then to my face, then to Tara. His jaw tightened so slightly that a person who had not spent a life watching for danger in small movements might have missed. "Alan," he said. "Not Dad. Not welcome home. Just my name, clipped and neutral." I tried to stand straighter, even though my chest hurt. "Better each day," I said. "Thank you for letting me stay here while I recover. It means everything to me." Silence followed. It was not long in seconds, but it changed the room. Tara looked at Kevin. Kevin looked at her. Something passed between them with the practiced speed of people who had already discussed you in your absence. Tara set the bag down beside the sofa and said, "Dad, we need to talk." The sentence made me cold. It is strange how the body knows before the mind agrees. I lowered myself onto the sofa because standing had become difficult, and the cushions swallowed me in a way that made it hard to keep my posture. Tara sat at the far end, leaving an expanse of beige fabric between us. Kevin remained standing near the fireplace, arms crossed, an owner of the room. Tara looked at her hands. Her nails were pale pink, perfectly shaped. "The thing is," she began, "recovery from this kind of surgery is a big deal. 6 to 8 weeks, right? That is what the doctor said." I nodded. The clock on the wall ticked behind her. She continued, "You will need help with medications, rides to follow up appointments, meals, probably help getting in and out of chairs, showering maybe." She swallowed. Her words had the flattened quality of rehearsal. We both work full-time. Kevin's job is very demanding right now. My schedule is packed through the end of the quarter. And honestly, Dad, we are just not equipped for this. I tried to answer quickly because panic had begun to rise, but I did not want it to show. I will not be much trouble. I can manage most things. I just need somewhere to sleep until I get back on my feet. Kevin gave a short exhale through his nose. That is the problem, Alan. You cannot manage most things. Not right now, and we cannot manage you. Tara shot him a look, sharp and brief. What Kevin means is, she said, her voice thinner now, we cannot provide the level of care you need. It would not be safe. Safe? That was clever. Safety is one of those words that makes abandonment sound responsible. I looked at my daughter, and memory did something cruel. It placed 7-year-old Tara over the grown woman in front of me. Tara after Linda's funeral. Hair in 2 uneven braids I had done badly. Sitting at the kitchen table because she was afraid to sleep alone. I had slept on the floor beside her bed for 2 months. I worked days, came home, cooked badly, washed her clothes, learned which teachers needed notes, which nightmares required holding, which silences meant she was missing her mother too much to speak. I worked weekends when money was tight. I took overtime until my hands cracked in winter. Dance lessons, braces, school trips, prom dress, college deposit. I did not resent any of it. That was the problem. I had never placed my sacrifices in front of her, so she had learned to walk over them as if they were floorboards. I sold my house to pay for the surgery. I said quietly, you know that. I have nowhere else to go. Tara's face flushed. That was your choice, Dad. We told you we could help with the medical bills, but you insisted on handling it yourself. She said it as if their offer had been a generous, stable bridge I had refused instead of what it had truly been. A loan Kevin would mention for the rest of his life. I remembered that conversation. Tara had said maybe we can help a little, and Kevin had immediately started talking about repayment schedules, interest, documentation, tax implication. He had used the word boundaries 3 times. I had declined because I could not bear to owe them more than I already seemed to owe by existing. Kevin stepped forward. Besides, he said, and his voice grew sharper, you are not our responsibility. You are a grown man. Figure it out. Tara said his name, but softly, more warning than objection. I looked at Kevin, this man in his warm house with 4 bedrooms and a renovated basement. This man who had accepted dinners, gifts, help with the mortgage when business slowed. Checks from me when Tara called crying because the refrigerator died right before Christmas. I looked at him and understood that in his mind, receiving from me had never created obligation. It had only confirmed my lower position. People like Kevin do not feel gratitude toward those they consider beneath them. They feel relief that the useful are still functioning. Where am I supposed to go? I asked. Kevin shrugged, and that shrug was the cleanest expression of his character I had ever seen. There are places, rehab facilities, extended stay hotels, senior services, maybe insurance covers something. Tara added, maybe Aunt Ruth could help, though Aunt Ruth was Susan's sister in Florida. A woman who had not called me since the funeral because grief makes some people kind and others absent. I stood slowly, my chest pulled so sharply that for a second the room dimmed at the edges. Tara half rose, then stopped herself. I picked up the plastic bag. Dad, she said, do not be like this. Like what? Like a man hearing the truth. Like a father realizing there is no bed for him in his daughter's house. Like a patient discharged into the care of family who had already decided care was too costly. I walked toward the door. Kevin's voice followed me. Alan, you need to understand something. I stopped with my hand near the knob. He stood behind me in the entryway, arms crossed again. You are a burden. That is just the truth. We cannot sacrifice our lives to take care of yours. There are wounds the body cannot locate, so it sends pain everywhere. Tara gasped, Kevin, but she did not say, that is not true. She did not say, he is my father. She did not say, he can stay. I turned and looked at her. She had tears in her eyes, but tears are not defense. Tears cost nothing. I nodded once, opened the door, and stepped into the October afternoon. Behind me, their argument began in low, urgent voices. Not about whether I should return. I could tell that immediately, but about how Kevin had said the quiet part too loudly. I walked down the path with the plastic bag in my hand. I had no house, no car I could drive, no recovery plan, no bed. My chest hurt. The sun was bright. A neighbor across the street lifted a hand in a small wave before realizing something was wrong and lowering. I did not look back. The downtown Mercy shelter took me because Sister Mary Catherine took everybody she could, even when the beds were full and the city had forgotten how to be ashamed. By evening, I was lying on cot number 47 beneath fluorescent lights that never fully dimmed, trying to breathe shallowly enough that the incision would not pull. The place smelled of disinfectant, old clothes, institutional soup, and the sour human odor of fear left too long in crowded room. Men coughed, men muttered, men turned in their sleep with the restless vigilance of people who did not trust closed eyes. Cot to my left belonged to Frank, an elderly man who kept talking about a grandson named Ben who was coming next week, though one of the volunteers later told me Ben had not visited in 5 years. To my right was Tommy, maybe 40, with a factory cough and hands stained by machine, oil no amount of washing removed. I lay between them with a zipper bag of medications under my pillow, because the intake volunteer warned me things sometimes disappear. That first night, shame was heavier than pain. Shame is not rational. I knew I had been operated on. I knew I had been refused shelter by family. I knew I had done nothing morally wrong by needing help. The mind of a working man can be cruel when he can no longer work. It repeats the vocabulary of usefulness until you begin to confuse need with failure. Kevin's words moved through me like a fever. You are a burden. I pressed one hand over my chest and felt the raised ridge beneath the bandage. A surgeon had cut me open to keep me alive. My daughter had closed her door for the same reason, or so she would tell herself. 5 days in the shelter did not pass. They accumulated. Each morning began with shuffling feet, metal bed frames squeaking, men lining up for bathrooms with cracked mirrors, volunteers pouring coffee into foam cups, someone arguing over a missing jacket, someone else apologizing to no one in particular. My body had no patience for that environment. Recovery requires rest, nutrition, quiet, predictable medication, clean surfaces, steady temperature. The shelter offered none of these reliably, but it offered a cot, and at that point a cot was more than my daughter had offered. I tried to make myself useful. On the second day, I helped wipe tables after breakfast, until Sister Mary Catherine appeared beside me and took the rag from my hand without asking. She was small, silver-haired, late 60s perhaps, with the kind of face that had stopped performing softness because real compassion had made performance unnecessary. Heart surgery, she said. Sit down before you undo somebody's expensive work. I started to protest, and she gave me one look. It was not unkind. It was absolute. I sat. She came back later with a folding chair and sat beside my cot, while I sorted pills with hands that were less steady than I liked. You are the bypass gentleman, she said. Alan Morrison. I nodded. How are you managing the pain? I am managing. That is what they all say, she replied, especially the men who have confused silence with dignity. I almost smiled. She asked how I got there, and because she asked without pity, I told her. Not everything at first. Just surgery, the sold house, Tyra, Kevin, the word burden. She listened without interruption. People who truly listen do not rush to comfort. Comfort too soon can become a way of refusing to hear the whole truth. When I finished, she asked how long my wife had been gone. Which one, I said before I could stop myself. She did not flinch. Linda, Tyra's mother, died when Tara was 7. Heart attack. Sudden. Susan died 3 years ago. Cancer. Sister Mary Catherine nodded, as if placing stones on a grave. And you raised Tara alone after Linda? Yes. Construction work. 41 years with Morrison Construction. Not family, just a coincidence of names. Laborer first, then crew lead. Foreman. I worked until the arthritis in my hands made ladders dangerous, and my knees began predicting weather better than the news. Tara was everything after Linda. I made sure she had what she needed. Dance, braces, school, college. I did not want her growing up feeling like she took up space in somebody else's life. Sister Mary Catherine looked at me for a long moment. And did anyone teach her how to make space for someone else? The question was quiet. It broke something open. That became the middle of my days. Those conversations. Sister Mary Catherine found ways to ask the things I had spent years not asking myself. When did Tara first start speaking to you like an obligation? When did you first notice Kevin counting your value in dollars saved or spent? When did you learn to apologize for needing what you had freely given? I resisted at first. A father's loyalty is stubborn, even when it has become self-harm. I told her Tara had stress. Tara had responsibilities. Kevin was difficult. The house was not set up for recovery. They had work. They had lives. Each excuse sounded weaker spoken aloud in a shelter chapel that contained men whose families had also had lives, jobs, guest rooms, reason. On the third night, Frank woke crying out for Ben. Tommy reached across the gap between cots and put a hand on the old man's shoulder until he quieted. No speech, no lesson, just one discarded man comforting another in the dark. I turned my face toward the wall and cried silently, because I understood then that abandonment is rarely a single event. It is training. It begins with smaller exclusions, shorter calls, holidays rearranged, visits postponed, favors framed as inconvenience, affection becoming conditional on low maintenance. By the time you are left at the door after heart surgery, the leaving has been happening for years. The shelter also gave me examples of what survival looked like after identity had been stripped away. Marcus had been an accountant before diabetes took his leg, his job, then his apartment. He still read financial newspapers at the library and spoke about markets with more intelligence than most men on television. Robert, a Vietnam veteran whose body had returned decades before the rest of him, kept paperback novels folded in his coat pocket and woke half the room some nights with screams he never remembered in the morning. Tommy had worked 12 years at a factory that moved overseas and left him with a cough, a severance check, and no insurance. They were not symbols. They were men's. That mattered. If you call people symbols, you can feel sorrow and remain separate. If you learn their names, separation becomes harder. I began to see the shelter not as proof of my failure, but as proof of a larger cruelty. So many people had been reduced to need, and then blamed for needing. So many had spent lives building, fixing, serving, raising, carrying, only to be set down when their carrying days ended. Sister Mary Catherine said once during morning service that every person in that room had loved someone, and I watched men stare at the floor as if the statement hurt more than accusation. Loved someone, worked, dreamed, mattered. She said circumstances change. Worth does not. I wanted to believe her. I was not sure I did. On the fifth afternoon, I sat on a bench in the small courtyard, face turned toward weak October sun, trying to let warmth reach somewhere pain medication could not. I was tired in a way sleep did not solve. The chain-link fence separated the courtyard from a street lined with pawn shops, a laundromat, a liquor store, and a check cashing place with neon signs promising solutions that were really traps. Traffic passed, people walked by without looking in. That is one of the things you learn quickly at a shelter. Most people do not look directly at suffering unless they have come to manage it professionally. Then the black Cadillac Escalade appeared. It moved slowly, once past the shelter, then around the block and back, like a shark deciding whether the water was worth entering. It stopped in front of the main entrance. The driver's door opened, and a man in an expensive gray suit stepped out. Everything about him was wrong for the place. The polished shoes, the controlled posture, the watch that flashed when he adjusted his cuff. He looked at the shelter sign, then at the men near the entrance, not with disgust, but with focused urgency. He went inside. Through the window, I saw him speak to Sister Mary Catherine, saw him open a leather portfolio and show her something. She looked at it, then turned toward the courtyard. Her eyes found me. My stomach tightened. The man came outside with Sister Mary Catherine beside him. He scanned the courtyard once, and when his eyes landed on me, he stopped as if a long calculation had finally produced an answer. He crossed the concrete toward me. His shoes clicked. Men looked up. In places like that, expensive strangers draw attention because money is rarely neutral when it enters rooms of need. He stopped in front of the bench. "Alan Morrison," he said. I nodded because my throat had tightened. "My name is James Richardson. I am an attorney." He reached into his jacket and removed a photograph, old, creased, protected in a plastic sleeve. "I have been looking for you for a very long time." I remember thinking how absurd that sentence was. People like me did not get looked for. We got processed, discharged, denied, transferred, placed, forgot. He held out his hand, then seemed to think better of pulling me up too quickly. "There is someone you need to meet," he said. "She is dying, and she refuses to sign her will until she sees you." The Cadillac was too quiet inside. Leather seats, tinted windows, the faint scent of cedar and something expensive. James sat beside me in the back, while a driver took us through parts of the city I knew by name, but not by access. I asked where we were going. "Whitmore Medical Center," he said. "Private hospital, best cardiac care in the state." I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because 5 days earlier I had been discharged into homelessness from Mercy General, and now a private hospital was involved in some mystery no sane man would believe. James opened a folder and handed me the photograph. A young woman with dark hair held a baby. Her face was wet with tears, but she was smiling at the child in her arms with such fierce love that I looked away before I understood why it hurt. "The baby's birth date," James said quietly, "was March 15th, 1960. "My birthday," I stared at him. The woman is Sarah Whitmore. The baby is you. The words did not enter all at once. They struck and fell away. I was raised by my aunt, I said. My parents died when I was young. James's expression remained gentle, which made it worse. Margaret Morrison was not your aunt by blood. She adopted you through a private arrangement. Sarah Whitmore was your mother. Her mother, Margaret Whitmore, is the woman waiting for you. Whitmore Medical Center rose out of landscaped grounds like a building designed by people who believed illness should be hidden inside luxury. Marble lobby, fresh flowers, quiet elevators, nurses who moved with the calm of staff who had never been forced to choose between understaffing and compassion. We rode a private elevator to the 14th floor. The hallway had carpet, paintings, antique chairs, no smell of cafeteria coffee or bleach. Suite 14A looked less like a hospital room than a wealthy person's final refusal to be made ordinary. Tall windows overlooked the city. Flowers stood in crystal vases. Machines hummed discreetly. An elderly woman sat in a wheelchair by the window in a navy dress and pearls. Oxygen tubing resting against a face, so thin age had made it almost transparent. When she turned toward us, her eyes found mine and widened. They were my eyes. Dark brown, tired, direct. James said, "Margaret, I found him." Her hands gripped the wheelchair arms. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You look just like your grandfather." I stood in the doorway, unable to move. It is difficult to describe what it feels like to meet a stranger who looks at you as if you have been missing from the world. Tyra had looked at me like a problem. Kevin had looked at me like a cost. Men at the shelter looked at one another like warnings of possible future. Margaret Whitmore looked at me like proof that prayer had not been entirely wasted. "Come sit with me," she said. "Please, Alan." I sat carefully, aware of my chest, my cheap clothes, my unwashed shelter jacket, the absurdity of my presence in that room. She reached for my hand. Her skin was cool, thin, veined, but her grip held surprising strength. 63 years, she said. "I have been looking for you for 63 years. She told me my mother's name was Sarah. She told me Sarah had been 17, brilliant, stubborn, in love with a construction boy named David Morrison, my father. She told me her husband, Charles Whitmore, powerful, cruel, obsessed with family reputation, had sent pregnant Sarah to Switzerland under the lie of schooling, arranged a private adoption, controlled money, records, people. Sarah died giving birth to me in a foreign hospital, calling for her mother. Margaret was not there because Charles had forbidden it, and because fear can make even love cowardly. She said this without defending herself. That mattered. Cowards who become honest late in life do not become innocent, but they become something rarer than proud people. They become accountable. I asked why she had not found me sooner. She explained records destroyed. Agency closed, families moved, investigators failing, Charles dead too late, trails cold. She said Margaret Morrison, the woman I had called Aunt Margaret, had been kind, childless, willing to take me, and at first had sent yearly reports and photographs until Charles discovered it and stopped them. She said she had kept every report, every photograph, every birthday gift she was never allowed to send. She said she had watched from a distance when she could, through investigators, never interfering because each lawyer warned that contact might expose me to legal battles, scandal, harm, and later, because she believed perhaps I had built a stable life, and she was not entitled to disrupt. I wanted to be angry. Some part of me was. Another part was too tired. She had lost a daughter. I had lost a mother before knowing I had one. The grief in that room did not compete. It recognized itself. Then James mentioned the will. Margaret turned toward the window before answering, as if the city below needed to hear it too. Whitmore Enterprises was worth more than $400 million. Real estate, investments, medical research partnerships, charitable foundations, including, I later learned, significant funding for the Mercy Shelter. She had no living children, no close blood heirs. Distant relatives circled, lawyers waited, board members worried. But she had refused to sign final distribution documents until she met me. "Everything goes to you," she said. The words were too large to understand. Money at that scale stops being arithmetic and becomes weather. I told her I did not know how to run anything. I had been a construction worker, a foreman, a widower, a man from a cot in a shelter. She smiled faintly. "You know how to build," she said. "You know how to work. You know what it feels like to be unseen. That may be more valuable than you think." She made one condition before signing. "Spend time with me. Whatever time I have left, give me that. Let me tell you about Sarah. Let me know my grandson before I go." I said yes because there was no other answer I could live with. 3 days later, I stood in the doorway of the room Margaret had kept for me at Whitmore Mansion. The estate sat in the hills outside the city behind iron gates and old trees. A sprawling house with too many rooms and too many portraits, built by men who expected their names to outlive their sin. The room was on the second floor, facing the garden. It had begun as a nursery, and had grown with the child she imagined me becoming. Soft blue walls, hand-painted ships, a crib in one corner, then shelves, drawers, boxes, a twin bed. Later a desk, later suits hanging in a wardrobe. Gifts filled the room, 63 birthdays, 63 Christmases, toys still boxed, books still crisp, clothes with tags yellowed by time, a red bicycle, baseball gloves, model planes, college brochures, envelopes tied in ribbon. I walked through it as if through the preserved chamber of another life. Margaret sat in her wheelchair behind me, oxygen whispering. I could not help myself, she said. Every year I bought something. It was the only day I allowed myself to believe you might come home. I picked up a present tagged, Happy 16th Birthday, Alan. Inside were car keys, never used, and a savings bond for $5,000. I bought money for your first car, she said. I did not know what kind you would want. I thought perhaps we would go together. Her voice broke on together. I set the box down because my hands had begun to shake. The letters were worse, more than 2,000 of them, tied in bundles, written weekly when I was small, monthly later. Then on birthdays and holidays when age and illness made her hand less steady. She read one from when I was 5, wondering if I liked swings, if someone pushed me high, if I laughed the way Sarah had. I sat on the bed and listened to a grandmother speak to a child across decades. He had already survived without hearing her. Love delayed does not arrive cleanly. It arrives with all the years it failed to save. That room did not heal me. It devastated me. Every gift was proof that I had been wanted. Every unopened box was proof that wanting had not been enough. News of the inheritance did not remain private. Money never travels quietly. Within 48 hours, Tara began calling James Richardson's office. Not me. Him. 17 calls in 1 week. At first, according to James's notes, she asked whether the inheritance was real, whether I was legally competent, whether a man recovering from surgery could be influenced by unfamiliar people, whether she as my only daughter should be involved in protecting my interests. Protecting my interests, that was what she called it once I became rich enough to interest her. Margaret listened to the reports with cold attention. She insisted on meeting Tara. I did not want it. I was not ready. Margaret said, "You need to see what comes through the door when money opens it." She was right. Tara arrived in a silver sedan, stopping at the gates long enough for security to call the house. I watched from the library window as she drove up the main road, past the fountain and gardens and peacocks moving like arrogant ghosts across the lawn. She sat in her car for 5 full minutes before getting out. When she did, she wore a black dress I had never seen, expensive but restrained. Her hair pulled back, makeup softened into a style that said dignity, concern, grief if necessary. She was acting before she entered the house. James escorted her to the drawing room, a formal space chosen by Margaret because intimidation, when used sparingly, can be clarifying. Portraits of Whitmores lined the walls. Margaret sat in her wheelchair beside the fireplace. I sat across from her in a tailored suit James had arranged, because Margaret said my daughter needed to see that I was not walking into the room as the man she discarded. Tara entered and scanned the room with a speed that told me more than her greeting did. She registered the paintings, the silver, the rugs, the chandelier. The staff member near the door, Margaret me. For 1 second, shock broke through. Then she stepped forward, arms open. "Dad." I did not rise. I did not reach for her. "Hello, Tara." Her arms lowered slowly. Margaret told her to sit. Tara perched on the edge of an antique chair and began her performance. Gratitude that I had found family. Relief that I was safe. Concern that everything was happening so quickly. She said I had always been proud, stubborn, reluctant to accept help. She said she and Kevin had wanted me to recover somewhere appropriate. Margaret asked simple questions in the tone of a woman laying traps with silk thread. If you wanted him somewhere appropriate, where did you arrange for him to stay? Tara spoke of options, facilities, programs. Margaret asked where I actually slept. Tara's hands tightened. Margaret answered for her. "A homeless shelter. Your father, after major heart surgery, slept on a cot in the downtown Mercy shelter because your husband called him a burden, and you allowed it." Tara flushed, denied, reframed. She asked me to tell Margaret about the conversations we had, the options discussed, the help offered. I looked at my daughter and felt nothing for a terrifying second. No anger, no love, only distance. Which conversation, Tara? The one where Kevin's mother might need the guest room. The one where the bathroom renovation made a 4-bathroom house unsuitable. Or the one where Kevin said I was a burden while you stood there silently. Tara's eyes filled. You are taking it out of context. What did you say? I asked. When he called me a burden, what did you say? She said nothing. Margaret asked when she first learned about the inheritance. Tara answered too quickly. James produced call logs. Tara tried concern. Margaret named calculation. Then something in Tara cracked. Public composure fell away, and beneath it was not remorse. It was resentment aged and cured in silence. You do not know what he is like, she said to Margaret, voice rising. He made me responsible for his loneliness after Mom died. He never remarried for years and acted like sacrifice was love. Then when he married Susan, I was supposed to care for her like she was my mother. When Susan got sick, I had to visit, had to help, had to pretend. He never had money, never had stability, always made everything feel heavy. Now everyone is acting like he deserves this fortune because he suffered. He is not a saint. He is exhausting. He is needy. He is selfish in the way lonely people are selfish, because they do not know how much space they take up. The room became very still. Tyra's chest rose and fell. Her mascara had begun to smear. I watched her, and the pain came not because every word was false. Pain rarely comes from pure lies. It comes from truths sharpened into weapons. I had been lonely. I had leaned too hard sometimes. I had wanted my daughter close because grief had hollowed the house. But needing love had become, in her mouth, an indictment. When she demanded to know whether I was cutting her out, my answer surprised even me. I told James to establish a trust for Tara. $50,000. Tara stared. Out of $400 million. $50,000. I said it was more than Kevin believed I was worth. The money would release when she turned 40, giving her years to decide whether she wanted a relationship with me or preferred the story in which I was selfish and demanding. She tried then to become small. Daddy, she said, soft, pleading, using the child voice that had once made me buy dolls I could not afford. She apologized, said she was scared, emotional, said she loved me. I searched her face for remorse and found calculation wearing wet eyes. I know you love me, I said. You love me exactly as much as I am useful to you. I do not think that is love. Something hardened in her. You will die alone, she said. All this money will not change that. Then she left, heels striking marble like small verdicts. I sat after the door closed, and the house seemed too large again. Margaret took my hand. I am sorry, she said. I told her I needed to know. Now I knew. Margaret died on a Tuesday morning in November with my hand in hers and sunlight across her bed. Her last weeks were both gift and punishment. She told me about Sarah until the stories became a second inheritance. Sarah loved rain. Sarah hated pears. Sarah read novels under blankets after bedtime. Sarah once cut her own hair at 12 and declared herself modern. Sarah wrote my father's name in the margins of school notebooks. Sarah died holding me. Margaret's last words were, tell her son became what she hoped. Then her hand loosened. I stayed after the nurse turned off the machines, because leaving felt like abandoning another woman who had waited too long. The fortune became mine in documents first, then in responsibilities. $400 million does not arrive as a suitcase of money. It arrives as meetings, signatures, board members, property managers, tax attorneys, trustees, foundation directors, investment committees, employees whose health insurance depends on decisions, buildings with roofs, shelters with budgets, scholarships with recipients, problems multiplying behind every number. I learned, not easily, not gracefully, but I learned. I kept the managers who respected the work and removed the ones who spoke of charity as branding. I expanded funding to shelters, starting with Mercy. I created the Sarah Whitmore Foundation for abandoned seniors, not a shelter in the old sense, not rows of cots under lights, but a community center with medical recovery rooms, permanent apartments, legal aid, grief counseling, workspaces, gardens, and staff trained to treat need as human, not shameful. Sister Mary Catherine agreed to run it on one condition. No pity architecture, she said. If you build a place for people who have been made to feel discarded, it had better not look like a warehouse for the unwanted. We built it with windows, courtyards, private rooms, a library, a kitchen that smelled of real food. Frank moved in first. Marcus became part-time financial coordinator. Tommy took over the workshop once his lungs were treated. The place grew. People called it a miracle. I knew better. It was money applied correctly to pain I could no longer pretend was abstract. I also created Tara's larger trust quietly. $5 million, not payable unless she completed 1 full year of documented service at a senior care or abandonment prevention program. With no publicity, no advisory role, no salary from the trust, no shortcut. James thought it generous. I told him it was not generosity. It was a door. Doors do not force people through. They simply prove whether someone wants another room. Christmas Eve, 13 months after Margaret's death, Tara came to the gate of the community center. Snow fell lightly, softening the iron bars and the garden paths. I saw her from the chapel porch after Sister Mary Catherine's service. She stood outside looking in at the lighted windows. The residents sharing cookies, Frank laughing with children near the tree, Tommy adjusting a loose ornament, Marcus arguing gently with a volunteer about budget receipts even on a holiday. Tara looked older, not dramatically, just less polished, as if life had begun rubbing at her edges. I walked to the gate. "Merry Christmas, Dad," she said. "Merry Christmas, Tara." She told me she had been volunteering downtown. 6 months, not a year yet. She said the first weeks were awful because nobody cared who she was, and nobody needed her performance. She said she changed bed linens, served soup, listened to a woman named June describe being left at an emergency room by her son. She said one day June asked if Tara had children, and Tara had gone into the supply closet and cried for 20 minutes because she realized she did not know whether she had ever truly been someone's daughter or only someone's beneficiary. I listened. She did not ask about money. Not once. That mattered, but it did not heal us. Nothing healed that quickly. She apologized without defending herself. She said Kevin had left after the inheritance news became conflict instead of opportunity. She said she had been angry at me for being weak, because she had been terrified of weakness in herself. She said none of that excused what she did. I told her the gate was not locked. She asked if I was sure. I said she had no right to expect forgiveness. She nodded. I said she had the right to try to earn trust. She entered. We did not embrace. That would have been dishonest. We walked together toward the warm building where people laughed because someone had taught them they were wanted. Tara asked questions about the residents, the foundation, Margaret, Sarah. Her voice shook when she asked whether I had a photograph of my mother. I said yes. Someday, perhaps I would show her. Not that night. Some rooms opened slowly. I still live at Whitmore Mansion, though it is less mansion now than headquarters, refuge, archive, and unfinished apology. Margaret's room of gifts remains, but many have been given away. The red bicycle went to a boy whose grandmother lives in one of our apartments. The books fill shelves in the community library. The baseball glove sits on my desk beside Robert Whitmore's pocket watch, the one engraved, "May you always have time for the things that matter most." I carry those words differently now. I do not pretend money restored what was lost. It did not give me back Sarah's arms, or Linda's laugh, or Susan's hand in mine, or the years Tara and I spent mistaking need for love. It did not erase the shelter ceiling, the cot, Kevin's voice, or my daughter's silence after he called me a burden. Wealth changed my circumstances. It did not unbreak what broke. I survived, but survival is not the same as rescue. I am permanently altered by the knowledge that I was unwanted until I was valuable, and loved from afar by a woman who could not save me until it was almost too late. That is the cold truth beneath the miraculous one. But every morning, the Sarah Whitmore Foundation opens its doors. Men and women who were told they were too difficult, too old, too sick, too poor, too inconvenient, step into rooms built to contradict that sentence. Some stay, some leave, some reconcile with family, some never do. I no longer believe every wound closes. Some only become places where light enters differently. I am Alan Whitmore Morrison, Sarah's son, Margaret's grandson, Tara's father, and a man who learned at 63 that being called a burden can either be the final word spoken over your life, or the first honest diagnosis of the people who never deserved to carry you. I was discarded after surgery, found outside a shelter, given an empire, and left with a heart that still beats, scarred, repaired, and less willing than ever to confuse usefulness with love.